Oddly enough, I'm standing in the very place that I bought one of my very first used cars. And like so many people, it wasn't a matter of want, it was a matter of need. Strolling down here thinking, what's the absolute best of the worst that I can afford? Which wasn't much. But with that perspective behind me, I'm going to take you through what it's like when you have the money to buy a vehicle like the BMW X3. Welcome to the X3 review. Now, talking about the exterior of SUVs or CUVs is so subjective. They're a dime a dozen. So it's going to be up to the buyer or the viewer to figure out, is this stylish? Now, something that is very different in modern cars is the interior. In the case of this BMW, if you're an older owner that has a car pre-2010, or if you're a current owner or a shopper looking to get into the brand, you could literally take a seminar on how to figure out all this stuff. I feel like you need a certification to operate some of the technology in this car. But instead of going over all that, let's start with kind of the good and the bad of the interior. Now I'm going to start with the biggest pro of this X3, and honestly, most BMWs in general. You buy this car for its level of solidity and quality, and that has to be the biggest cliche because you always hear that. And you may see some of this in cars like Mazda or Hyundai and Kia, where they've almost lifted out the rotary knobs, the steering wheel controls, the steering wheel design. But one thing I can tell you is the BMW still has those cars on the level of craftsmanship and solidity and how everything is put together so cleanly in this car. There's not one rattle. There's no knocking or cheapness or nothing feels loose. Everything feels like it went through a really good level of quality control before it went out the door. And, you just feel it in here from the way the doors shut, the way you're isolated from the outside. You don't get that in a lot of the cheaper brands. Yes, they're getting better, but they do it so well here that I can see why people buy these cars and never want to go to a different brand. Now, here's the problem with that. BMW has been copied so well that this no longer looks special. And if you're a manufacturer, it kind of sucks. When you do something so well, everybody kind of steals it. And we see the same thing in the phone market. Everybody went nuts for the iPhone. Now, every company from here to China makes phones that look exactly like an iPhone. You can't even tell them apart anymore. And that's kind of what I feel like in here. But the other huge pro is they haven't gone off the deep end trying to make it different just for the sake of it. They still have things that work amazing. Physical controls. You have a physical volume knob. You have physical rotary knobs for your HVAC controls to lower and raise the heat and cooling. You have physical buttons for your seat heaters and seat coolers. Well, this doesn't have seat coolers, but you have a fan speed control. All of your sport buttons, your eco buttons, all physical here. I don't have to menu jump. Your infotainment has physical buttons for each thing. Maps, media, your phone, and the physical command knob to get around the screen. And that is just such a breath of fresh air when so many manufacturers have made it an internal policy to get rid of all the physical buttons. And guess what? We still have fingers. So as long as we still have hands, there's going to be a need for physical controls. Now, where there's physical buttons, there's going to be little ergonomic annoyances based on your body type or the size of your meat hooks. And for me, here's the couple problems that I've had, and you may not even have them. The volume rocker up and down button on the steering wheel. It has very little physical feedback to what it is. I can't really tell what's up or down. And to make matters worse, they put the voice activation button right below the volume down button. So at night, I constantly hit the voice activation control on accident, and it's so annoying.
Damn it!
Could you repeat that, please?
The next thing about this X3 that's positive, namely in this trim level, is the comfort for the driver and passenger. And one of the big reasons why it's good is it has a functional level of seat adjustment. Now, of course, it depends on your body type. I always say that. But what do I mean by functional? If you get into certain luxury cars, they're going to try to blow you away with the marketing, how it's got this 100-way adjustable seat. Then you sit in it and you dick with it for like 20 minutes and you still don't feel comfortable because there's just too much going on. With this car, and like most BMWs, it's nice. They have thigh cushions that are manually adjustable. So if you have longer legs or you have bigger legs, you can kind of tweak that for comfort. It has adjustable bolsters, side bolsters, so you can move the seat in. If you're skinnier and tighter, you can feel tighter, or if you're larger, you can move them out. And then the regular adjustments just seem to get you in the right position. And that's, it's one of those things that you think about, well, that's not really a big deal. But in this car, it kind of is noticeable. So aside from the seats, everything has a quality, comfortable, soft feel to it. Your armrests are good. The door padding's good. The steering wheel, all the soft touch is good in here. You just always kind of feel cushy. Now, the other area that kind of surprises me is this feels more like an American car because you have real cup holders. You have a huge pocket in the door for a bottle, and I guess this is technically an American car. It's made here. And a lot of that thought, the design for storage is really excellent. And you even have a sliding, like louver style cover that goes over your storage space to cover your phone or your valuables. And it's also good because if you get a lot of crumbs and crap that's already in here, you can just kind of close it up and not have to look at it. The only thing really negative I can talk about is just the choice of materials. And I know it's hard in modern cars, but there's so much shiny black plastic crap in here. There's fingerprints and smudges all over everything. The center console area, when I got it, it was just full of dust. I've had to clean it every day since I've been driving it. It's just one of those things. When you have shiny stuff, you gotta clean it a lot. Now, the back seats are gonna be a big deal, because you're probably gonna be having passengers, I would hope, in a car like this. But when you get back here, you realize this door opening is really narrow. If you're a bigger person or you're trying to load a lot of cargo back here, forget it. I feel like they made a sacrifice here to improve the back hatch space and the front occupant space. The other thing is the seats do recline like pretty much every car in this class or type, but the seats still feel very straight up and down to me. If you're getting an X3, you want this, an electronic lift gate, and surprisingly, it's not too slow. Some are pathetic. This is not too bad. I could deal with it. When you get this up, you realize you can fit pretty much anything that you want in here. It's got a really nice cargo cover. The seats, again, fold down in 3 different ways, and you have a lower storage area for a full-size spare. Well, it's not truly a full-size spare, but it's not a straight-up donut, and your battery is located under here. So you can fit a lot of stuff in here. My only kind of complaint is there's no lip on this shelf. And I noticed when I had cargo in here, if it's flying around and not tied down, I'll get on a hill, park, and everything will fly out because this just kind of like falls downward. Now, the last 2 things to talk about are the gauge cluster, which I complain about on a lot of modern cars that go to a full LCD screen. It's just a screen and no real gauges. And it's so flat, so boring, and so generic. BMW uses 2 things. They have physical bezels around their screen and bezels on the side for their digital, temperature gauge and fuel gauge, which is really nice because it does create that 3-dimensional aspect to it. Now, there's not a ton of customization you can do to this. And some of the information on here is just kind of generic, but you can change it in the infotainment, kind of the layout. And when you switch from sport, adaptive, comfort, and eco mode, it will change your display structure. For the most part, I don't screw around with it. I think it's pretty well done. The black levels are pretty good on here, and it's not too bright at night. So I kind of give it a pass there. Now, I've saved this for last, the technology or infotainment or BMW's iDrive, whatever you want to call it. Now, the most impressive part about this is its utter responsiveness and speed. It doesn't matter if you get out of this car for 5 hours or 5 minutes. When you get in here, these menus fly. Everything is loaded and ready to go, either via the touchscreen or the rotary knob. And it makes it so much more easy to use and less frustrating. And the big thing is you can tell that this is a very mature, super developed piece of software that BMW has taken very seriously compared to the competitors. And this is where they stand out. This is almost like its own operating system. And the responsiveness is what you expect from like a phone or a tablet. It really works well here. Get directions to Gentlemen's Club.
Gentlemen of the Press 1215 Cranston Road, Beloit, say yes, or select another entry from the list.
Now, if you're just using the basics, your home screen has media, how you can configure it however you want. But I like it because I can just tap into my weather, my Bluetooth audio, my phone, and it's great. The problem is when you start to dive deeper into the real menu structure and you want to start to tweak stuff. For example, I got in this car and it had the HUD. The heads-up display was on the windshield, and I hate it. It's distracting. So I'm like, well, I just want to turn it off. Instead of having like a one-touch physical button to turn it on and off like some cars, I literally took 10 minutes before I could find it in the menu the first time. So you have to go to the home screen, you have to go to My Vehicle, you have to go to iDrive settings, you have to go to displays, and then heads-up display. Now when you think about it, and the menu structure there, why the hell doesn't HUD have its own physical menu? Why do I have to jump through all that to adjust it or turn it on and off? And that's the deep-rooted problem with all the technology they're trying to jam into these cars. It's literally like dealing with Mac OS or Windows where you're trying to find something. Now, it's so annoying. And, you know, you'd say, oh, why don't you use the voice search? Okay. Turn on heads-up display.
Could you try again, please?
It has no idea. And, you know, then you have to figure out what the commands are. Maybe there's a voice command for it, but then I'm going to have to sit here and dig through a manual to figure out. It just, you know, that's the type of stuff that drives me nuts. Now, all your other stuff is in here, from touchpad settings to your wireless charging tray. You can turn that on and off for alerts. Your equalizer for your audio control, which you can go in there and you can use the touchscreen. It has a real EQ in here, unlike most cars. But there's so many different menus in here, from the intelligent drive menu to the gauges. It goes on and on and on and on. And it, you know, if all you're using is the basics, you're really gonna like it. Now, obviously, I've put the BMW X3 on the Bendpak lift, and the primary reason for this is to show you some of the things that differentiates this vehicle from other brands. You know, a lot of it is going to be the same in modern cars, but there's a few things to really point out, so let's get on with it. Now, BMW has a real cute marketing term for a lot of this engineering. It's called efficient dynamics. And what is it? Well, it encompasses a lot of their engineering philosophy: weight reduction, fuel efficiency, aerodynamics. In the case of the X3, you see a lot of it up front. The first is all of the aluminum in the front suspension. Both the lower control arms, the hub, the entire knuckle design is all aluminum here. And it kind of continues up into the strut area, but the strut, of course, is, you know, produced by another OEM, Monroe here, and they have adjustable dampers in this model, which is optional. But you can see there are brake ducts with a little bit of upkick on the aluminum dust shield here to help cool the brakes. And mostly what you're gonna see along the whole part of this car is aerodynamics and sound reduction. There's a vibration damper on the front strut. There are composite or asphalt panels and plastic panels to smooth out airflow along the whole underbody of this car. If you even take the drain plug cover off, you can see that there's a felt or an asphalt material underneath there to lower NVH and vibration and road noise. It's really impressive, and this is something, again, that you're going to get in a BMW. Now, of course, there's more aerodynamic pieces on the front of the X3. It has air curtains, which moves air through the front bumpers around the front wheels. Again, reduces wind turbulence. The front kidney grills are these signature BMW grills on the front. When you look at them, they're kind of unsuspecting until you realize it has active shutters in them. And what this does is it leaves them closed all the time to prevent all that air blowing through there. And it will only open them up when the coolant temperature of the car, it reaches a certain threshold. So it would open it up, cool the radiator, and then closes them back up. Now, when you make it to the back of the X3, you realize a lot of that functionality is all back here too. The plastic covers help move air over these rear lower control arm covers, which then move air upwards over this low profile muffler and out the back of the car. This acts as a diffuser. It's all about smoothing airflow, which improves aerodynamics and has the benefit of reducing NVH and road noise. Now, the rear suspension, you can see that it has an aluminum knuckle, which is made in Mexico. Your half shafts are made in the US, and you have stamped lower control arms or stamped steel lower control arms. The Monroe adjustable dampers are made in Spain, and then the drivetrain is also made in Austria and Germany. The car as a whole is manufactured in the US, so you can tell that they've leveraged a lot of their different assembly facilities and OEMs to build this car. When you get under the hood of the X3, regardless of the trim level, regardless of the motor you choose, weight reduction. Lightweight hood, same treatments in the fenders, in the door skins, and all of this adds up to a 4,300 pound curb weight. And you might think that is a lot of heft for a vehicle like this. And think about what it would be like if they didn't put all this effort into weight reduction. It would be probably 5,500 pounds or 5,000 pounds. The more important thing to talk about than just weight is this architecture or platform was not designed to be some front-wheel drive Frankenstein with all-wheel drive added onto it. This car, right from the drawing board, they wanted it to have a 50-50 weight distribution. So what it ends up being on our scales is 48% of the weight's on the front, 52% is in the rear, and it has almost a 50-50 cross balance left to right, which is super impressive for an SUV or CUV. The benefit is it's not going to plow around like a Honda CR-V or a Ford Escape. It behaves more like a sportier car. And what that means is you can put more engine in this. Now, this specific tester has a 2-liter turbo 4-popper. And for me, if I had BMW money, I would not get a 4-cylinder, and it just depends on who you are. If you don't care about that type of thing, you don't care about engine performance and refinement, then this is going to be fine for most people. It makes a ton of power, a ton of torque. It always feels like it's ready to go and it's eager. It just doesn't sound all that inspiring. Now, all the motors have direct injection. I would step up to the 6-cylinder version of this, and supposedly the rumors are there's going to be an X3M. And you think about why would you put a even higher performance motor in the car? Well, the chassis can handle it, and it's obvious based on these weights and all of that as well. So the last thing to talk about is BMW ownership in terms of cost to own and maintenance. It's no secret that BMW has one of the highest maintenance costs of any production car or higher volume production car. If you're owning this out of warranty and you're out of your maintenance plan, you just know right up front it's going to cost more to take this to a dealership than pretty much any other car. Now, there are a lot of shops that just specialize in BMW, and locally to me, there's a couple guys that are amazing. They don't rip you off. They can really get a lot of the stuff done. And the other thing about it is, despite some of the costs to repair, maintenance, Scott always talks about he would rather work on a BMW and Honda than pretty much any other brand because a lot of this is logically laid out. But that's it for the In the Shop segment. Let's get right to the meat and potatoes of Now that you understand some of the X3's underpinnings, the way that the suspension was designed, the aerodynamics and all of that, You know, you can throw out the interior, the exterior styling, but if this car doesn't drive well, none of this matters. So let's talk about the driving experience. Let's cover some of the pros of the X3. Now we know it's completely balanced, but the other important thing about a driving experience is the steering. And the steering in this car, it's really surprising because you feel something through the steering wheel. Now, that's really odd in modern cars with electronic power steering. Typically, you put your hand here, you feel nothing. It's like a video game steering wheel. You're not really connected to anything. But this car does give you some feedback, and it's just enough not to be annoying. It's one of the best parts about this car. And the reason is you have a dual ball joint setup, you have more direct steering, you have variable gear ratio steering as a part of this $1,400 dynamic package. So it really does feel good for being an SUV or CUV. Now the negative part about it with being variable gear ratio, even in comfort mode, I find that it's way too sensitive to turn in for the type of vehicle it is, because you know this is still, even with the sport suspension, adjustable dampers, this car does have body roll. And you know, sometimes when I'm on the highway, I don't want to just breathe on the steering wheel for it to turn in. And I know that's a weird statement, but in a car like this, I'd prefer to have it a little bit more lazy. So that's the pros and cons of the steering. Now, when you put it in sport mode or adaptive mode, it does kind of change the effort based on your speed and how much steering input's needed. And I think it finds a good overall balance. Now, the biggest pro of this car is its level of isolation and quietness. With the acoustic glass in the front windshield, I had somebody get in the car and they said, "Is this thing really going 85 miles an hour?" And I'm like, yeah, it is. You just can't hear any wind noise. And this is a windy day. It's really, really good how well it just, you don't hear tire noise, you don't hear wind noise, you really don't hear anything. And it's one of my favorite parts of driving the X3. Now, ride comfort is a factor. Now, because this vehicle has adaptive dampers, you can kind of switch it to the mode that you want. I typically ride in comfort mode or eco mode to get better fuel economy. And even when I go into sport, the dampers don't get ridiculously firm. Yeah, I mean, you notice it, you know, it firms up, it feels a little bit tighter, but it still does a really good job over broken pavement. And that's an important thing if you're getting a vehicle like this. You don't want it to beat you up. I'm going to go back into comfort here and talk about the tires. This has run flat Pirellis on it, and you know, they're pretty quiet, but I feel like they are pretty rigid. You know, I know they're trying to find a balance between sport and ride quality here, and I think they've done it for the most part. For the buyer that's looking at this, I don't think you're going to find too much complaints with the tires. Now, how long they last is a totally different story. Now I'm going to throw this into sport mode. I've disabled the traction and stability control as much as it allows you to do, and I'm going to put it in manual mode. Now you can kind of take manual control of the transmission with the paddles by clicking them, but the true manual mode where it allows you to hold revs is when you move the stick over to the left. So let's take a look and see how this handles through some turns. Holds revs in manual shift mode. These upgraded brakes do a really good job. I think for the $1,400 for this, I would upgrade to that package with the adaptive dampers and having the ability to take more control of this car with that package, with the brakes, with the dampers, and the changes to the steering, programming the variable gear ratio steering. It's a really good balance between kind of like a putter cruiser and, you know, a sporty combo. And one of the big things that you want to talk about in a car like this is the transmission is buttery smooth. It's a torque converted unit, but it allows you manual control. And when you take manual control, it really lets you take manual control. It will downshift almost to the red line. So I'll show you what that looks like here. Now let's talk about acceleration. This has a twin scroll turbo for a 4-cylinder, which also has 2 inlets, which is supposed to help eliminate turbo lag. So if you come to a stop, let's say in comfort mode, like you're at a light and you want to nail it, first, you have to deal with the auto stop start restarting, which is a delay. And then you have to deal with the turbo lag, which seems like a lot before that torque and boost kicks in. So the only way to alleviate it is to kind of put it in sport mode, to turn the traction stability control off, and put it in manual mode and brake torque it like typical automatics. Hold down the brake, give it some gas, then you're really taking off. That's when the acceleration's at its best, and I think most people are going to be satisfied with it. Let's take a look at how this does through the rest of the turns. Brakes are really good with this package. I like them a lot. So we'll push it through here again, and I got to tell you, the nicest thing is all these cars come with all-wheel drive now, and because the weight distribution's so good, it feels more rear biased than it does front-wheel drive, and I think that's the biggest pro of driving the X3. This is definitely not some eco SUV, CUV. It feels more performance-oriented. It feels more like a driver's car, and I know that, again, I say cliche a lot, but it has a really good sense of control and fun to drive aspect that you just don't see it a lot in these type of vehicles. Now, yes, you're paying a lot more money for the BMW badge, but I think they've done a good job at balancing all of it together. Final thoughts on the BMW X3. Here's the pros and cons. The biggest pro of this SUV or CUV is its level of solidity. When you look underneath, you look at the body structure and how it feels to drive, it just feels so substantial. And it's one of those things you can't really explain until you drive a platform like this. The fact that they engineered it from the ground up to be balanced, 50-50 weight distribution, front to rear, side to side, that's something you don't get even in a lot of cars. So, you know, all of this is those things that are working in the background that make it so enjoyable to operate. The second pro is the steering feel. It has steering feel, it's amazing, and it's just enough to make you feel connected to the vehicle. Now, those are the two biggest things. The third is also the sound insulation or isolation you get from the road. It seems to just absorb all the negative parts of bad road surfaces, wind noise, and it does it just enough to make you feel comfortable. And that's the biggest part. You feel extremely comfortable driving this. And you know, you could go into more pros like the infotainment. It's one of the best ones out there. It's extremely fast. And if you're just touching the surface with it, using the basics, you're really gonna enjoy it. Now let's get into the negatives. That being technology. It's overbearing. The infotainment, again, as good as it is so complicated. And I said this in the earlier part, I feel like people that get this car need to go to a seminar. If you're older and you're not tech savvy, it's gonna be just a nightmare to deal with. Now, the other part of the technology is the intelligent safety package. That's optional, which is good because in my tester, it didn't work. It had a fault in one of the sensors or camera modules. And when you start to look around this car, you see, you know, 4 sensors in the front, there's sensors in the rear, camera modules in each side view mirror, in the front and the rear bumper. And you're thinking, okay, this is great when it's new and shiny and, you know, you feel all good about the experience. If you're planning to keep this car long-term out of warranty, these are the things you're gonna start to look at. Somebody hits it with a shopping cart and breaks one of these modules. Well, there goes a lot of these systems, and they will malfunction and they will cost you a lot to repair. And you know, same thing with the infotainment. The screen or the touch membrane goes bad. The LCD panel in the gauge cluster, all these little things add up in long-term ownership. So that's just more of a, you know, explanation of the tech. Now, the other negative part is there is so much in this car that is optional and extremely expensive as, you know, like safety tech, the premium audio system, you know, the moonroof, a lot of these features that get bundled into more affordable cars. You can get a more affordable car with a lot more features than you could get in a BMW. And I think it's time that they start adding this stuff as standard features because you're just paying so much for it. There's really no justification other than margin for them. Maybe that's how they make their money, obviously. So, pick your packages carefully. If you don't drive hard, then you don't need the dynamic handling package with better brakes, which are going to cost you more money in the long term. Adjustable dampers, as if they go bad, a shock is going to cost you more. It's one of these, just be smart about what you're tacking on in terms of options, and you're going to be really happy with this thing. Take care. I'll see you next time.